Kia ora, welcome to Greenpeace Live. My name is Jerissa Lee. I'm the seabed mining campaigner here at Greenpeace Aotearoa. Tonight we're going to talk about the deep sea and the dangers that deep sea mining presents for the Pacific. I'll be joined by two special guests who will talk about the broader Pacific campaign. We'll talk about the current state of play. We may talk about dark oxygen, and we'd love to hear from you. So if you have any questions, just drop them into the chat of the live stream. So first, our conversation starts here in Aotearoa, where we have an urgent challenge where Trans-Tasman Resources is trying to mine the seabed of the South Taranaki Bight. And we have the added concern that our government may fast track that consent despite not being able to demonstrate that the project won't cause harm to our environment and our communities. So we're going to play a little video for you that shows some Greenpeace activists taking action against Trans-Tasman Resources and the project, but also Straterra, who was the lobbyists for the mining industry and have the ear of the government.
I am here today from the Straterra headquarters, where myself and two other Greenpeace activists are locking down Straterra's Wellington headquarters. This is because we are deeply opposed to seabed mining in the South Taranaki Bight, and Straterra is the lobbying group that advocates for seabed mining.
Today, Greenpeace activists have occupied the offices of Straterra because they are pushing the Luxon government to allow Trans-Tasman Resources to mine the seabed of the South Taranaki Bight. Worse still, TTR hope to use the fast track approvals bill in order to circumvent the usual checks and balances. This is because they can't demonstrate that their project won't cause irreparable damage to the environment and to the community. If this project goes ahead, 50 million tonnes of iron sand will be mined every year for 30 years and cause significant harm to marine life, which includes rare pygmy blue whales, the critically endangered Maui and Hector's dolphins, and little korora. Over 60,000 people have signed our petition against seabed mining in the South Taranaki Bight, and more than 20,000 people marched for nature and against the fast track approvals bill back in June. We've made submissions, and now more than 7,500 people have signed our open letter cautioning companies who wish to use the fast track approvals bill for their polluting projects. You have been put on notice, and we will take action. And so just days before that action, I was in Rarotonga supporting Cook Islands-based NGOs and the local community who held a peaceful protest calling for the government to better protect the ocean. And it came about because the Cook Islands hosted in that week an annual underwater minerals conference, and locals who are in opposition of the government's intentions to explore and consider deep sea mining, and they have real concerns, and the civil society in the Cook Islands are calling for, some are calling for a moratorium and precautionary pause. And just this morning we had the local community of Pātea who held a hikoi, also against the seabed mining in Taranaki as well. And we're talking about all these things because we believe that they are linked. We believe that the seabed mining project here, and whether or not it goes ahead, is connected to the fight further out in the Pacific against deep sea mining. If one of those gets the go ahead, it will open the floodgates for the industry to enter into waters that provide livelihoods for communities and coastal communities, Indigenous communities throughout Aotearoa and the Pacific. So I'd like to introduce our guests tonight. We have Shiva and Langi, and I would really like to let you both bring yourselves into this space. So we'll start with you, Shiva, and then Langi, if you could introduce yourself afterwards, that would be great.
Yeah, kia ora. And Bulavanaka, I'm Shiva, and I'm quite privileged to be here, and I'm truly grateful that I've been given a little bit of a space to have a chat with some incredible people in this room right now, to talk about something that we are all passionate about. I am from a remote mountain, well, we call it mountain, but it's small hills, village in Navoli, Fiji, and my ancestry is actually from the southern parts of India. Through colonial history of India, our ancestors and my great-great-great-grandparents, etc., were brought to Fiji as indentured slaves long time ago. So I've got a bit of a torn history in terms of multiple parts, because then my parents, for a better future for their children, me included, decided to take the journey towards Australia. And I was privileged, and I am privileged still, that my parents are living on the beautiful Darug country, where the elders have preserved the culture and community for 60,000 years. So I am, like I said, I'm extremely privileged, and thank you so much for this opportunity to kind of share a little bit of our Pacific perspective on something that we all care about, which is deep sea mining.
Kia ora. Langi.
Kia ora, Teresa. Hello, everyone. My name is Langi Toribau. I'm from Fiji as well. I come from a little island closer to the main city in Fiji. It's called Viua, Aotearoa. I come from a lineage of custodians, and my ancestors are protectors of our natural resources. In the part of the Fiji where I come from, there is no such thing as differentiating responsibility when it comes to land, ocean, or the sky. There is no terminology for it. So there is a custodianship that is bestowed upon the lineage where I come from. And I feel like that this is my calling, and I'm also very privileged to be sitting here. It's nice to be back in Aotearoa, and to be able to share a bit about the story of the Pacific on this industry that we're trying to put a stop to before it happens. And I think, as you had opened up a address, I think it's all connected with what's happening here and what's happening in the Pacific, and with the recent work that you've also engaged in Cook Islands. So I really look forward to this conversation.
Well, thank you both, and welcome. Welcome to Greenpeace Aotearoa, and also welcome to our Greenpeace live show as well. Appreciate you both being here with me tonight. So Shiva, if you could maybe talk a little bit about your part in this Pacific fight against deep sea mining?
Yeah, look, I'm currently the head of Pacific. I don't know what you can make out of the title, but anything that happens in the Pacific in terms of both climate and like Langi so eloquently put, that in the Pacific, many communities don't see a difference between climate and ocean. Everything is part of one ecosystem. And anything that happens in the Pacific in terms of our body of work at Greenpeace, I have a beautiful team who work together to try and effect incredible change around that. And one of the campaigns that we are currently working on is deep sea mining. My role personally in that is multifold because there's a lot of engagement politically and the lobbying and advocacy that's required in Pacific governments, but also how the region then ties to the global environment in terms of the International Seabed Authority, which maybe we'll be discussing later, and also creating a space in the Pacific community led by communities in the Pacific in terms of activism, in terms of creating, having the education around deep sea mining, and then they build that power to push their governments so that we have a united Pacific when it comes to stopping deep sea mining.
And Langi, you've been around Greenpeace, the Greenpeace halls for many, many, many years and touched very different campaigns. What is unique about the deep sea mining campaign?
I mean, I think there is a sense of urgency to this issue of deep sea mining. One is that we have a potential to stop a big destruction before it happens, and something that is irreversible, that the impact can leave generations to come. It's a moment in history, and I think this is one of those issues that has the potential to go down as a legacy issue for people of the Pacific. I think by virtue of the fact that there is a lack of understanding of how rich and important the deep sea is, requires some level of sacredness and approach for us to be able to touch the things that we don't truly fully understand. And I think the uniqueness of this issue as well is this is another, in my view, this is another form of colonialism, and it is showing up in the prospect of economic development for our countries. And I'm happy to be able to unpack that a bit more, but I fundamentally believe, and one of the reasons why I've come back into the space, into this fight, because I believe the injustice is real on this, and the need for protection is a no-brainer. And we need to be able to do everything in our power as people that can connect to the ocean to be able to protect this for our future generation. I can't stress enough the irreversible damage of what this industry could bring to the Pacific.
Right, so as you were saying before when you introduced yourself, we need to stop it before it starts. And you think it's winnable?
I absolutely think it's winnable. I think the lenses in which I look at the Pacific at the moment, and I might just take this time to also just give a bit more of my story and how my worldview has helped me to grapple the complexity of this issue, to be able to make it a bit more simple in a way that we can understand what needs to happen, rather than it is stuck in a political corridor somewhere, it is stuck in a lobby meeting somewhere, or an industry AGM somewhere. It's a very simple narrative that we need to run. I started my career as a volunteer in Greenpeace, straight out of university, in school, and because I fundamentally believed, and I was a bit angry with some of the small little things that we were taking for granted, like throwing rubbish. And I think that there was a need for me to be able to equip myself with an understanding around mindset around extractivism, around how the world works, around politics. So I spent several years in the Pacific working on fisheries, on climate, things that matters for us in the Pacific. And I've always had a curiosity to understand how the rest of the world works and how power works. So I had the privilege to be in China for a while. I wanted to understand how the Chinese wall works, how politics in China works. I spent a bit of time in Korea trying to understand the dynamics of the Asian geopolitics, including Taiwan, where I was also there for a while. I've done quite a lot of global work on oceans, chasing after pirates for several years out in the Pacific, seeing firsthand how the industry works and the rich ecosystem that we have in the Pacific. And part of my journey took me to Africa, where it's the kind of same narrative that we're running. It's the false economic solutions that are brought to developing countries and people that have been denied the right to be able to explore their own resources, first and foremost for their own needs, before it's exploited for economic incentives. The fight is the same. I saw that from my time in Africa, supercharged, where the politics and the realm of power is very much aligned to industry interest. And coming back into the Pacific, I've literally just returned back to Fiji. So I've decided to take a bit of a downtime. I'm calling it semi-retirement. But what I'm able to do now is I'm able to see extractivism show up in cloaks and in different outfits, but it's the same system. And they come with false solutions. They come with false promises. They come with technology. They show up in beautiful suits. They caress you into shiny hotels and big political meetings and all of this. And it's the same dynamics. And that's exactly what we're seeing in this industry. But I think the point that is why this is so unique and the sense of urgency in the Pacific is the Pacific has awoken. Climate change is, right, we're feeling it. Oceans resources, the narrative started to shift. They've started calling themselves as large ocean states. They don't want to be at the mercy of developing economies and countries coming to extract the resources in the Pacific. This is one of those things that they don't need to spend time in exploring even. They just need to leave it alone. We've got enough stuff to deal with. And I think that is simple as the message that we're needing to be able to provide. And certainly that's the reason why I'm kind of back and helping Shiva and the team in helping make sense in how we can escalate this to become a winnable campaign.
Yeah, so I picked up, and I want to make sure we come back to it. I picked up that you said colonialism. I heard you talk about your own worldview. Shiva, you referenced the way you see nature as not being separate from us and as being one big ecosystem. And I also know that that's something that I like to talk about. That's our worldview and our lived experience that we want to share, and we think is a legitimate argument, but that gets challenged by people who don't share our worldview. And I noticed that in the Cook Islands. I noticed that last week with the action in Wellington against TTR and Straterra, being challenged and being asked is it really a cultural tie or is it just emotional? And having that being called a frivolous argument. And so I'd really love to hear what your thoughts are. And, I feel so strongly about this being a legitimate argument. And I'd love to hear your thoughts on it, if that is strategically what we should be saying. And if it's, or if we should be trying to win it. But, I think when you feel so strongly about it, you want to keep talking about it and keep trying to change mindsets away from a colonial worldview into something that protects and is custodial, you know, a custodial way of looking at the world. And how does that work in campaigning, particularly political lobbying and campaigning with governments?
A tough question, actually, the one. But if you look at how the systems have been put in place, right, from the bodies that we work with, like the United Nations, the International Seabed Authority, the influence of governments and outside organizations, like Langi was saying, into the Pacific region, it's set up for one part of the hemisphere, or the thought processes around that. But if we look at our Pacific, the systems that we have kind of lived for generations doesn't fit that worldview in that sense. And now we are told, in a way, to break that system by those who actually set up that system. And they want to play that part in breaking the system. And I'm saying this in this sense, because if you look at the interest of deep sea mining in the Pacific region, and those who are now pushing for deep sea mining, even Pacific countries, the influence is not from Pacific. The influence has been people from industries that are beyond the Pacific. And it's for that extractive reasons of just financial gain for themselves. And I say this in a, again, if you look at the facts about this argument about these companies that bring this argument of that we want to build your economies by giving your Pacific communities extra job opportunities, etc. But if you look at the current exploration expeditions that these companies have gone into, and you look at the staff that is Pacific, and fortunately there's not enough Pacific staff because we don't want our Pacific people to do this. It's a handful. There's about 4 or 5 vessels in the Pacific right now, or acting on behalf of the Pacific from these external industries, and only 4 or 5 are staff from the Pacific. That promise of economic, that argument of economic reasons that we are going to provide job opportunities doesn't hold, right? That sense. The question you were asking about, do we take that worldview of that, is this like a frivolous exercise? Or our Pacific people are so connected to our ocean. Our moana, our saltwater, our wasa, we take every opportunity in a way to show our connection or tell about our connection to this ocean. And I want to remove the ocean in terms of the body of water. I want to take it as what our communities, why they are connected. There's a spiritual reason for it. There's a deep spiritual connection to the ocean. It doesn't mean it's just for our livelihoods. There's an identity tied to that ocean. So when people like you, Jeresa, who went to Cook Islands and you so deeply feel passionate about it, it comes from a place that's beyond surface level. It comes from a very deep place of connection that you have with your ocean. And many parts of our Pacific have that same connection. This promise of the balance of economic versus the spiritual connection of the ocean, you cannot destroy or step on cultural connection to try and make money out of this. We've seen that across the world. Langi so eloquently put it again in terms of Africa, the region around extractivism. If you look at the Pacific, the types of extractivism that they've used is our land. Our deepest connection is Vanua or Whenua, our land, right? And then the second deepest connection is the ocean. One side of extraction has already destroyed our connection to land. And now that same industries are trying to say that they want to transition into an energy system by destroying the largest carbon sink that is currently keeping our Pacific at least safe from even more damage. I'm originally from a humanitarian emergency background. The amount of Category 4 cyclones, 5 cyclones in the Pacific is unheard of. I was in Vanuatu last year in March when it got hit by 2 cyclones, Category 4 and 5, within 2 days. Within 2 days. And you just have to see the damage that happens to our communities. And that is because of the extractivism and the use of fossil fuels by companies by taking advantage of Pacific communities. In the end, the Pacific has to deal with that destruction. And now they want to destroy the thing that is kind of keeping this beautiful peace amongst all this chaos in the Pacific. I find it extremely insulting that notion of that it it is a frivolous exercise, or are you connected to the ocean? Why is outside groups coming to have an influence in Pacific communities? But Pacific people are the ones pushing against this. And I said, I'm talking very passionately about this because you get very angry to think about when people try to question your own connection to the ocean, to your own connection to your Pacific. And I feel like, personally, the people are rising in the Pacific because the ocean means so much more than what these industries think the ocean means to us. And we have to take that as a weapon, and I say the weapon in the most peaceful way, to rise up against these industries and the North governments that are trying to push this focus of extractivism again, and this method of neocolonialism or colonialism, because it never has a positive outcome. Yeah, you just have to look at the history of colonialism and extractivism to know it never has a positive outcome. And the ones that are always faced with the destruction and picking up the pieces and rebuilding every time is the communities of the Pacific or all the other climate vulnerable nations that we call it now. Yeah.
Yeah, we have fence line, frontline communities.
That's right.
Yeah, it's very predatory, isn't it? And I think what really bothers me and sometimes keeps me up at night is that this new emerging kind of extractivism is really, I guess, exploiting the vulnerabilities, or what could be looking for vulnerabilities to exploit, and that they're using all sorts of actually tried and true methods. If we, like you said, if we look back in history, we can see other extractive industries and how they have gone into communities and basically preyed upon them, sold them a story, economic prosperity, jobs, riches, and
Quality of life.
yeah, exactly, quality of life, good health, and in some cases, a bank ended up abandoning these communities when they're in their highest time of need, where the exploitation was so bad it completely devastated either the health of the community and or the environments. And what I'm seeing now is these wannabe deep sea mining companies coming in and greenwashing what they want to be doing. And, I heard you talk today, Langi, about what was basically using deep sea mining, as a false solution to the climate emergency response. But they're in these island nations, buying wheelchairs and sponsoring sports teams and really getting a foothold into the community. And it's alarming. And so I guess my question here is how do we talk to our own communities, about recognising what is happening here and realising what could potentially happen, and how to see what is happening and how to avoid it and step away from it before you get tied into very deep with these companies.
Yeah, I can probably start off with painting a bit of the picture of the possibilities of tackling this industry before it starts. I want to take a bit of a step back to kind of position the Pacific in terms of all of the other issues that are at play. The ocean, it's important. the spiritual connection that we have. Tuna fisheries is the single biggest economic driver for most Pacific Island countries. The coastal fisheries resources is important for coastal communities. It's a climate regulator and a source of connection as well for most Pacific Island countries. So that's very well known. And the fight has been very clear from the Pacific that the people of the Pacific are backing up, that we don't want to be called the helpless Pacific Islanders, that we are the ones that are drowning and we are not able to take control of our own future. And the narrative that is shifting now, that has the backing of the Pacific, is we demand a recognition that we are large ocean states, and we can control how things are done that is helpful for humanity. That's one part of the puzzle. And the other part is on climate, emission-wise, we're very minute. I think what is 0.01% of emissions comes from the Pacific, but we are more progressive. And we have taken the fight all the way through all international bodies, fighting for and calling out the injustices that are happening, naming and calling those big polluter countries to be able to reduce their emission. That fight is very well known. This is those, so we've got enough, at least within those two paradigms. Now, when you unpack what is the driving forces behind the Pacific, it really is the question around the development and growth model and paradigm, right? And there is some of this false expectation that has been brought in by different extractive industries around the promise of development and growth. I'm not really sure what model that would look like, whether it's trying to be similar to the US economy or the European system, or a developed worldview, a developed nation worldview. And a lot of the changes that we've seen in the Pacific is trying to aspire to a model of growth and a quality of life that forgoes the very basic value systems and culture that we have in the region. And they do this through the notion of, they make things technical, and they bury conversations by using money and forces and promises and the facets of extractivism and how it shows up. And these are typical, I mean, you kind of just have to look at history in different parts of the world where colonialism happens. They thrive on this. And the facets of the developed world thrives on competition and on extractivism. I think those are the two pillars that that's their stronghold. And they will evolve. But competition and the race for natural resources, because we have it in this part of the world. Okay, we're approaching environmental boundaries on certain parts of our natural resources, but comparatively, we still have the opportunity to be able to protect our natural world in this part of the world. And that's the fight. That really is the fight. And it's quite easy to fall into the trap of a false promise, which is what this industry is, because it doesn't take into account our cultural belief system, our value system, how we are communal people in the Pacific, how we can live without money, how we can live in connection with our natural environment, and how our food can come from Mother Earth. And these are systems that are not recognized. And that's the dichotomy that we're facing with. And I think what this fight should unearth is a resistance that is not the normal narrative. Because this is deep. This is about the struggles and the hope that the current developed economic political system can't recognize yet, because it's not part of their system design. This is sacred to us. And I think that bridging that requires us to be able to tell our story, and requires us to be able to rise up, to educate that science is not just the science that they teach in the labs. We have our own science as well. We understand this way more better. History's back before this was even mapped out. And that's why you just need to listen to the stories of our indigenous communities from Hawaii, for instance, that have connected this, that this is so sacred, that this is the origin of life is in the deep sea, and they've been able to tell that story, and that has been narrated through generations through them. And I think that there is a level of ignorance because it's uncomfortable, because this is things that we are taught in the classroom, these are things that we are taught in the current system, and it shakes us. And to be able to sit with that uncomfortableness, I think is part of the journey. And I think that should enable us to be curious and ask some of these deep questions around, why are you even doing this? Why are you even rushing into this? Isn't this just another form of colonialism? And then we're going to have to pick up the pieces. We just have to look at what the phosphate mining in Nauru, look at what happened in Banaba. There are a number of industries, fishing industries, the region that have also collapsed. And it's the same model, it's the same industry model, that they're just coming up and dressing up in another way. So that's my plea, be curious and tap in and sit with that, your belief system and your value system, because that really is the fight. You're trying to fight with something that they've made so technical and that they've made you realize that it's so far off and you shouldn't really care about. But that's how they thrive. That's how they manipulate the system.
Yeah, can I just add to that?
Please.
Actually? Because there's a couple of things out of, I think your question was also around how these industries are coming in and promising, and then what do we want the people to be able to do? Yeah, and then the second thing was Langi talked about the cradle of life in a way, and how the indigenous people of Hawaii talks about the cradle of life. And I might get into the dark oxygen part of that actually, because I think you mentioned that and how important that is. The first part in terms of what should our people do when these things are happening. So if you look at the industry right now who are going into the certain Pacific countries in terms of promises, they are using the education system by sponsoring people from remote communities, etc., to be able to have access, which is fair, like as in terms of the scholarships for the people, but for that promise that they are trying to now buy the community, and that's very disrespectful, right? Like you're buying the community so that you can access their ocean to be able to destroy it and plunder it, right? The other ways these industries are getting in is having competitions in school to name the exploration vessels a traditional indigenous name by putting money value to this competition. You've got leaders who gave traditional vakas with a nodule planted on it at a Pacific forum of all leaders to say that the traditional, which is the vaka, should be merged with the modern, which is the nodule. Like these are the tactics that these industries use in a way, and I find it deeply offensive.
Nodules that are millions of years old.
Exactly, millions of years old, which has been extracted and just planted and given. But it's what I'm saying is that it's deeply offensive because they take this assumption that our communities, and excuse my language, are dumb to understand this method, and it's not. As Langi said, there's actually an uprising of Pacific community against this because they can see through these kind of activities and actions and ways of trying to buy the silence of the communities while they plunder the ocean. The second thing was the cradle, and what I firstly actually think the communities could do is that let's use the same systems. Let's educate our kids more. Put it in the curriculums of our schools. Second thing is these industries are also trying to use what our Pacific is so connected with, faith, which is churches, to be delivering sermons, etc., around why deep sea mining is important. Let's engage with our churches because they know what it means to hold our communities together. And one of the ways that they always do it is the cultural connection to our vanua and our oceans. Yeah. Now, I want to go into the dark oxygen part, the cradle of life, because I think Langi started this conversation. I'm having thoughts in my head around this. And he said very clearly that these industries try to use technical language. So I'm going to try and make this technical language very simple. There was a study done, funded partly by the metals company, which is a company that wants to mine the deep sea, funded partly by them. So that means the scientist was kind of working on their behalf as well, to do a study on the deep sea around nodules. And something that came out of it was this fascinating fascinating element of oxygen being produced by the same nodules that they wanted to mine. And this oxygen then could be the life source or life breath of any others. Now, the whole thing about previously was that there is no oxygen in the deep sea. Oxygen in the deep sea needs to use this method called electrolysis, and I'm just going to make it simple, is water is made out of hydrogen and oxygen. And usually it takes like an energy or light to try and split this. But this was different. This was in the deep sea, dark, but some form of energy existed that split that hydrogen and oxygen, and that oxygen got released, and now it's called dark oxygen. Science, backed by peer-reviewed methods, scientists that was partly funded by this industry, and now that same metals company is questioning the very ethics of that study, the very ethics of that scientist, and saying that they don't agree with the findings of this and they were going to do a rebuttal. It's running a very dangerous line. You are now starting to question professionals who you kind of put on in that space to come up with an should have been independent study who actually came out to find that there's oxygen in the deep sea, which kind of fits very perfectly with the narrative that the Hawaiian indigenous people have been talking about for ages, that life originates in the deep sea and it requires oxygen. Yeah, so I thought I'll just try and see if I can make that simple for our understanding as Pacific people, that please just know that the ocean is the source of life for so many of us across the Pacific. So rise up, change the education system, talk to your government leaders to be more vocal in forums to say that do not come and exploit our ocean. Talk to your church leaders so that they can unify the communities and also their government leaders to talk against this industry, because it's extremely important for the future survival of our generations that come afterwards.
Can I just add something on that? That's also something a bit more tangible. So I think you opened up with the recent action that Greenpeace Aotearoa did with Straterra. And I think part of the same challenges that you are unearthing through that action, where they were trying to use a fast approval process mechanism, is similar to what we're seeing in the Pacific, that they're bypassing the need for community consultation. And before they know it, which is one of the things that we, through the work that different partner organizations and communities are starting to ask, like, why are we just finding about this now? This issue has been in the Pacific since, like, I think as early back as 2009, that this discussion started to happen in the Pacific. But it's been kept behind closed doors. And I think that there is a legitimate question that needs to be asked around whose interest are you representing as my government in the Pacific, constituents-wise. And it's very clear right now that they are, the government and industry collusion is, they're not even apologetic about it. They're not even shy, they're not even hiding it. And we've seen it in recent political dynamics, like the forum, or some of the prior meetings, the International Seabed Authority, where the industry and government running the same narrative, pushing for this, is not hidden. And you start to question around whose interest is our government actually running. And I think that there is a simple legitimacy question that needs to be asked around. We have a voice. At what point do we need to be consulted? And we demand, we have a right to be consulted around what your policy is and how you enter into this space. And I think that that is something that needs to be asked across the board. And I think that would also apply for New Zealand. For Aotearoa, including the Pacific, is the need for stakeholder engagement. Because, like I said, the view right now is very much one-sided. It's industry-driven, and it completely forgets this other element around the tradition, the culture, our values, and all of that.
We hear governments, that are pro-deep sea mining, talk about, their sovereign rights, and I guess as a wahine Māori and as a vaine Rarotonga, I believe that Māori also, and in fact Indigenous peoples across the Pacific also have sovereign rights, and so where are they in this conversation? And, you know, about the science and the Indigenous knowledge, I always like to really champion or promote or advocate for decision making to be made with the best available science in collaboration with Indigenous peoples and their lived experiences and their traditional Indigenous knowledge systems. And so I think we'll come back to that. You know, we've started to go into dark oxygen and the ISA. We're going to watch a quick video, which is a bit of an explainer video on what deep sea mining actually is.
Imagine a place where the sun doesn't shine and where life looks extraterrestrial, an undiscovered and fragile world essential for life on Earth. Dive into the deepest, darkest part of the moana. The deep seas around the Pacific are threatened by monstrous machines from mining companies ready to irreparably destroy this magnificent world. These companies are after polymetallic nodules. With dollar signs in their eyes, they want to extract these nodules from the seabed. These formations are millions of years old and contain metals and minerals like manganese, cobalt and nickel. The companies claim they need these to make batteries for electric cars, but several car and tech companies have already said they do not want to use deep-sea mined minerals at all. There are already new battery technologies that do not require them. What are the consequences? Many unique animals live in the deep moana, such as sea cucumbers, octopuses that lay eggs on manganese nodules, and bioluminescent fish. In the area where the industry wants to start mining, we don't even know 9 out of 10 species. This world, full of life, will not survive the destructive mining, and some species will likely disappear forever. The consequences of mining extend beyond the seabed. Even whales and dolphins are disturbed by the lights, noise, and sediment of the mining machines. The oceans are an ally in the fight against the climate crisis. They absorb heat, provide oxygen, and store some of the carbon dioxide in the seabed. Deep sea mining could disturb these carbon stores and disrupt carbon cycling. Deep sea mining seriously threatens Pacific populations. For Indigenous peoples of the Pacific, the ocean is not only their main traditional food source, but also a part of who they are. Corporations need to stop the exploitation of nature for short-term profits. We can meet the need for metals by using the minerals we've already extracted. We must and can do better at recycling materials. Greenpeace has been protecting the ocean for half a century and has been campaigning against deep-sea mining for years. We've been researching the consequences of deep-sea mining, using our ships, working with people in the Pacific and persuading politicians. And not without results. Dozens of countries like Aotearoa, along with millions of people, have already spoken out against deep-sea mining. Join the growing movement to stop this destructive industry before it starts. Stop deep-sea mining.
Awesome. So, International Seabed Authority. Who would like to give our audiences a bit of an explainer on what they are, what their role is in terms of the deep sea mining debate?
I think maybe, Langi, would you like to start? And then I can fill. Okay. I have a very hard time with the International Seabed Authority because they have been given this mandate which is very conflicting. One is to preserve our oceans for all of mankind in a sustainable way. But they are also the ones who provide a platform to industries and governments who are pushing this deep sea mining to have a space to discuss about exploitation. If the word exploitation itself, right, like it's exploration, then exploitation, like as in, you already know what that means. It doesn't end well, usually. So the ISA is a body of member states, and then there's some spaces provided to industry partners or trade organizations like the metals company, etc., who gets given platforms by states or countries. And then you've got, with a lot of advocacy, a lot of lobbying, finally some space for civil society people. And this International Seabed Authority, it was so beautiful to see, and really grateful that Greenpeace could play such a huge role in that, is bringing people, indigenous people, the First Nations people from across the Pacific, and being able to have that privilege to provide a little bit of space for them at the ISA. Now, at the ISA, there's a lot of discussions that happen. You've got usually two parts to it. You've got like this legal and technical commission, which talks all about budgets, finances, etc., and how the ISA, which actually was a very interesting component this year because of the previous Secretary General, who had very serious allegations that was raised against him in terms of financial management. Where was the budget being used? How much of it was being used as part of influencing the election? All those things were being raised. So that LTC meeting, which usually can be very boring, was quite fun at this ISA, because you could see how the ISA is such a complicated and at times frustrating place. And then you have something called the Assembly or Council meetings. This is where the states, with input from a lot of technical people within those delegations, to be able to present the case on why they think deep sea mining shouldn't go ahead, why they think there should be regulations and processes in place, why there should be a general policy, all of those things. And Langi potentially could probably explain that a bit more. So it becomes a place of discussing around how can we protect the oceans in the best possible way. But the way it's structured right now is that it's already exploration phase. When do we start the exploitation phase? That's how it's set up. And that's a little bit about ISA in the most simplest kind of methods. Obviously, it's a UN body, so it becomes a technical beast, right, around that stuff. So I'll pass it on to Langi. Maybe he might be able to give you a little bit more of the process around ISA, because it's he can put it in the most simplest way that I don't think I will be able to eloquently put.
I mean, do we think, you talk about like having conflicting mandates, and so I guess, we could say that we're for a complete ban on deep sea mining, and therefore we probably wouldn't, if I were the ISA, I wouldn't entertain a conversation about policy and mining codes, because
exactly.
I don't think any level of deep sea mining is sustainable.
Exactly. Yeah.
And so I guess ultimately, if the ISA is charged with this mandate, are they pro-mining?
Yes, within the political state of play, which is why the last ISA meeting was super important for us to show up and to try to help the Pacific show up in numbers, because of this challenge between the need to mine and the absolute need to protect. The Pacific is very good at entering those kind of spaces. It has been very one-sided in most of the work of the ISA, which is why it was such a big push for a lot of the NGOs that showed up at the ISA meeting to try and make sure that the Secretary General term needed a rethink in terms of the leadership that is required, because of how blatant he was in disregarding rules and procedure, and very clearly demonstrating that he had the industry's interest at heart. And that wasn't even hidden. And then everybody saw it, and he wasn't even apologetic about it. So the system was heavily influenced by the industry, and it required a different approach. Now, when you kind of go inside the machinery of the ISA, there is two pieces of important work that is happening that tries to hold this competing mandates. So there is the development of a mining code, which will be the regulation if it happens. Touch wood, it doesn't. And there on the other side is the development of what we call a general policy. And this general policy is where the need for a moratorium or a ban would sit. And that would will be the protective mechanism for the work of the ISA. So that is, this debate is becoming a lot more urgent. So we will see this play out in March next year. So we've got quite a lot of work to be able to build up a bit of a momentum that the Pacific and our people, we prioritize on the need for the general policy to protect the deep sea. The mining code is based on a lot of assumptions. It's based on acknowledging even on the need for science, but they're still progressing on the need to mine. And it's clear. I mean, it doesn't really take a genius to figure out which side we choose, right? But it is being played in a realm of power dynamics, the region, which is what the political work that Greenpeace and other partners are doing are very important to be able to unearth and show the people on the importance of some of these processes as much as it's technical. We need to be able to show up as like there is, we recognize the need for the protection of the deep sea, period. And that voice, I think, will give quite a lot of power to Pacific governments to be able to show up with that.
Yeah, and just adding to how important that ISA was, especially around the elections of the Secretary General. Michael Lodge, who was the previous ISA Secretary General, like Langi said, was clearly siding with the industry. But there was another candidate that was put in the front as well, Leticia Carvalho from Brazil. And is she against deep sea mining? No. Brazil themselves are not against deep sea mining. But did the ISA need a change in leadership where it creates an even playing field? Yes, the ISA needed that. Right now, it was between those two choices. There was no one put as a Secretary General who was against deep sea mining. It was two who are for, right? But the ISA really needed a leadership change. And that, it's not that civil society was for Leticia Carvalho. Civil society was for a change that creates an even playing field where we can present ourselves and be present in that space and don't feel like there's already 1,000 barriers you have to jump over to try and make a case, where Indigenous people have their voices heard as clearly as possible without any boundaries and blockers in place. So that leadership is now gone. We've got a new leadership that we have to now keep accountable, make sure that we still continue this fight around deep sea mining because it's not ending anytime soon. Yeah? And the only way we can do that is still be present in that spaces, still bring our Indigenous voices there, still ensuring that our Pacific leaders stand up for our Pacific Ocean, where the mining will occur if it goes ahead. So these are this ISA, last ISA was extremely important, but the next ISA will become even more important because that change has now started. And it means now we are going to fight from an even playing field, and it means that we have now a huge chance, and Langi said it at the start, and you said it as well, huge chance to win this, because stop the deep sea mining before it starts. And if we can do that, there will be millions in the Pacific who will have a chance where their future generations could have a beautiful life of dignity. That's pretty much the essence of what I see normally of justice, is people who can live a life with dignity, meaning they can practice their cultures, they can stay on the land to speak the languages, they can have resources from their nature that they can utilize for their food. You know, all these things, I think, is what justice is. And I feel like now the political landscape in a place, which is an exciting challenge for our civil society that we should engage in with all the power that we have. Yeah.
Yeah, so we're seeing a little bit of a shift at that ISA meeting. So we've got Leticia Carvalho, who is the new Secretary General, the number of countries that are also calling for a moratorium or some kind of
32, I think.
is at 32, so it's grown by at least 5. Tuvalu has come on thanks to Greenpeace lobbying work, which is an important one to note because they were previously held a different position.
I'll just add one more thing. It's
Yes.
actually Greenpeace and Pang who did,
Our
our partner.
Yeah,
who
our
did,
partners
who
and
did-
our allies. Yes, very important to note. Thank you. And we have, we have the both of you, and that team is growing as well, doing work in the Pacific. There have been events that you have been at in people's ears, which is amazing. But if we go first to Shiva, and the Pacific Island Forum, which was in Tonga, we know that we had civil society, had a side event outside. I'm curious to know how important deep sea mining was as an issue discussed with Pacific leaders. Was it? Tell us.
Actually,
about that.
Langi was there as well, and we saw how it played. So Tonga was and still is, I think, current chair of Pacific Islands Forum, pro mining, right? Pro deep sea mining. Cook Islands, who was the previous chair, pro deep sea mining, and then you had this Secretary General of the Pacific Islands Forum, which is Nauru, pro deep sea mining. So it was like to have deep sea mining even in the agenda would have been a very difficult task. But that didn't mean it didn't stop the outside noise, which is the Civil Society Forum of Tonga led coalition of NGOs from across the Pacific standing up for the ocean. And there was side events, was a few things, there was actions, there was a village that was set up where every night they created education programs around what deep sea mining is, and that noise just resonated across all of Tonga. And I say this because right at the end, a communique that comes out of the Pacific Islands Forum. And in that communique, there's a short line about a talanoa that the Pacific Island countries will have on deep sea mining, because most of this dialogue happens in bilaterals, meaning like two countries talking to each other and maybe discussing deep sea mining, but nothing was discussed on the floor in Tonga inside the forum. Yeah. But the first question, usually when the communique is released, the media is called to come and listen to this communique and ask any questions. And usually culturally, and the practice that the Pacific Islands Forum always takes is that the first question needs to come from a media person from that country. And it was Tongan, yeah? So Tonga this time. So the Tongan Broadcasting Company, I think, the first question they asked is, so what is happening with deep sea mining? And that is because of the noise that happened at from the civil society outside. Because otherwise, deep sea mining wouldn't have been mentioned at all at the Pacific Islands Forum. And we've got to give the credit to communities who have mobilized in civil society, by Civil Society Forum of Tonga, who has so incredibly just united people in Tonga to call out against deep sea mining. Church leaders included, people from communities included, fishing folk included, indigenous people. It's just a beautiful thing to see when civil society members, etc., mobilize together and just use positive energy against, I guess, leadership that is pro extractivism.
Yeah, we see, just to make that parallel with seabed mining, the threat of seabed mining in the South Taranaki Bight. It's so broadly opposed, not just by local iwi, and other environmental NGOs, but, as you say, the fisheries, tourism, people who love surfing, and also it would be in competition with any opportunity to have offshore wind energy as well. So that's how destructive the mining is, and how important the ocean is to so many people and their livelihoods, their income, their source of food, their cultural ties, and so that you've reminded me that support is so mainstream, or the opposition, I guess, to mining is quite mainstream.
It's like that false dichotomy of like we need to go into this energy transition, which is required. The world needs an energy transition from fossil fuels, which is one form of extractivism that happens. And we need to transition by using another form of extractivism. Just doesn't make sense, right? Like it's a no-brainer of
you can't
don't
harm
need
the ocean to save the climate.
Yeah, the only thing that's right now protecting the climate in a way is that carbon sink, that ocean, right? So it's just for me, it's just fascinating that anyone can get even into thinking about mining the ocean. There are other ways. We've got proven methods of solar, wind, energy, etc. And now things around how do we reduce waste, recycle, all those things are better methods in terms of that energy transition rather than going into something that we know very little about. And that finding of dark oxygen just tells you that we know very little about the deep sea, and now we want to try and extract and destroy what many species and marine life consider as life is, for me, just mind-blowing and unthinkable.
Yeah, I think that this is a good moment just to answer one of our audience questions. So Jake has asked, isn't it better to mine the seabed than do more mining on conservation land? And I think what we were just starting to get into was, I guess, the need to move away from a linear economy where we are extracting, taking, making, and then discarding. And my thoughts on mining is that we should first be looking to use materials that we have already mined and looking to recycle those. And we should be exhausting all of those avenues before we even think about mining. And I don't know what you want to
100%, exactly the same. Like I was saying, that there's better methods. And recycling, circular economy, I think going away from the linear to circular economy is an option. Why not try that option? And that's proven, rather than going into something that has very little evidence around it right now. And that's why a lot of countries and a lot of concerned civil society is asking for a push for a moratorium, pause, whatever you can call it, many calling for a ban, so that the science can happen. And the science already has started and showed so much evidence that how much destruction it leaves behind.
It's not looking good.
No, and that's just from exploration. That's just from exploration. Think about exploitation.
Yeah, I think we might get to some of these questions, but first, Langi, if there's anything you want to add to that conversation around not just PIF, but what happens next, in terms of, I guess more in conversations that we need to be having with Pacific leaders, to shift.
Sure. I mean, the one thing that I think I'm always conscious of is when we get into conversation in silos. I remind myself that this is it's a symptom of the colonial way of thinking too, right? You are taught to think in boxes, and it's competition driven. There is an outcome, there is an output, and there is a benefit sharing, and there is a exchange. And that system shows up in different dynamics. And I always like to take a bit of a step back or to zoom up to kind of look at the question around the why should we be doing this, and the why is this important. And there is a shift in the Pacific that this is already happening organically without us even catching it. The conversation about the importance of the deep sea and the questions around what deep sea mining is and what the Pacific role is and how the Pacific needs to enter this space is not just happening in the deep sea mining agenda or the space in which it's been discussed. It's slowly trickling into the climate space. It's been discussed in the energy space. it's trickled all the way into oceans governance. And it's looking at when they start to look at boundaries and where resources are and the tuna fisheries. It is being discussed in the environmental sector, particularly around CBD and biodiversity. We're starting to see the churches talking about this a lot. The youths are rising. Those that are working in the decolonization movement are starting to pick this up. This is transcending. It's becoming an intersectional issue. And I think there is something important in that this is not something that is in isolation, because it touches the very fabric of the Pacific society as a region. And it's that level of consciousness that I think we also need to probably apply into this, that the change might not necessarily only come from those policy spaces that's been tasked to regulate the deep sea. It might come somewhere else. And I think keeping a bit of that opening to be able to see where shift and change might happen quicker somewhere else that is not traditionally in this, where you then start to build power, where you then start to build the resistance and build the movement, to be able to flip the stronghold the industry has on this issue in the region, economically and politically. And I think it's that level of creativity and imagination and innovation that I think that we need to do. So part of the work I'm doing to support the movement is to map out some of these spaces and to be able to give sound political advice on how to navigate that, and how to be able to kind of think about the bigger narrative, and how to kind of look into short-term wins, and how to create those small moments of urgency where we can also disrupt certain movement by the industry. And some of it might not necessarily only come from some of the traditional spaces that the industry already expects we're going to show up, because they're smart. They've become smarter at anticipating what we're going to do. And I think that also requires a level of sophistication for how we play the game. And I know that sounds really boring and campaigny, but I think we also need to know how they're thinking. We also need to anticipate where they're going to show up, and play them at their game, because to them it's a game, and it's money. It's a multi-billion-dollar industry for them if this does work. So they've got a lot to lose, and they're already losing a lot of the promises and the investments that they've been doing. So I think we need to hang tight in this, but we also need to be able to grow the movement and the resistance from other places where we can gain our strength and pull our strength together.
Yeah, I think we know them better than people may believe.
And they need to know that we know them,
because they're not doing anything new, actually. And we know them, I believe, we know them better than they know us, because they've never spent the time listening. And you talked about something earlier today about, leaning in and leaning into those conversations and bringing your values and your worldview into those conversations. And I think that what's got this wannabe mining industry in a bit of a flurry is that they're hearing things and seeing an uprising that they haven't perhaps expected. And while there's absolutely potential and room to grow that movement and activate communities across the Pacific, I am just so impressed with the Cook Islands action, the civil society, action in Tonga, our allies, our friends, our Pacific activists who went to ISA. I think we've got some very clever people and brave people that have started that movement. And so I'm actually energised and excited to see where that goes. I'm not at all And, you know, you've built my confidence saying it's winnable. You know, how long do you reckon? Give us a date, Langi.
A year. If all goes according to plan. We can flip this next year, but we can also give ourselves a year grace. But a lot of this is dependent on partnership. I think that is the fundamental thing about the movement, is that we need to show up as a movement, because this impacts all of us, not just those that are working on deep sea mining. And I think the widening of the reach and the resistance that needs to show up, it needs to be able to tell this industry, you can't just do this again. You can't just show up here again and allow us to believe that you have our interest at heart, which they don't. And I hope that the industry is also listening to be able to hear this, because we're not going anywhere.
I've got a question. I've got a couple of questions for either of you. Could one country go it alone and just start deep sea mining, or do they need the approval of the ISA?
Well, I think last ISA, actually, Langi, just fill in if I'm missing anything, but last International Seabed Authority, so 2 years ago, I think Nauru kind of activated this mining code timeline, and it was a 2-year cycle, and the metals company that's kind of supporting Nauru in this have kind of shown that intention that even if International Seabed Authority doesn't have the regulations in place, they will go and mine it. But that's a political suicide for Nauru if they do that. Yeah, that's going to create a lot of tension within the Pacific and a loss of trust in Nauru to not let the process play out, where they can hear all the Pacific leaders' voice around those things. So the industry can push a country to go and mine, but it's not the interests of all of mankind, right? That's what the ISA was interested to do. That's my assessment of it, but maybe Langi, you might have a different perception around that.
Yeah, no, I think that's correct. So I think that when it comes to the sovereignty issue that you were talking about, which I think links to that question, is when it comes to the national waters or the economic exclusive zones of Pacific Island countries, they do have that sovereign right, as long as they do have the domestic legislation to be able to do that. But it's not as simple as that they can, but they technically can, but they are bounded by certain international regulations. So there are CBD commitments, there are anti-pollution treaties and conventions that they do. So there are quite a lot
and even
of
national, right? Legislation.
National legislation in place, the requirement for environmental impact assessments. So it's a process that they have to go through. I think one of the interesting discussion that is happening inside the ISA, even within the mining code, is the impact when it does occur, even on exploration. Who is responsible? So if you were to forget about deep sea mining and remember the climate negotiation, right? And it's called the polluter pays principles.
Yeah.
So it's gonna evolve a bit into some of those kind of discussion around, even if I were to mine inside my own waters in Cook Islands, the impact of that, if it goes into another country's waters, am I responsible for the impact that, will I have to be responsible for how that will impact their ecosystem and their industry? Is it Cook Islands, or is it the industry that is coming to do the exploration on the mining? So it's a big undertaking, if they do choose to be able to do that. But they do have the right.
Yeah, the concept is like transnational boundary harm.
Yeah, transboundary
harm as well, right? So yeah, definitely. They can do it, like I said, but it could be a political suicide and a regional kind of isolation.
Here's another good question, following our circular economy. Would it help to push for stronger regulation to force better reuse of critical minerals that we already have in circulation?
Yeah, 100%. Like I said, if we put the time into exploration and exploitation, that time can actually be put into reforming national policies. national regulations around this concept of recycling, around this concept of trying to get us to a circular economy. And if the energy and resources are put into that, you don't even have to think about deep sea mining because there's enough resources to do that energy transition, enough minerals that have been already exploited from the land.
And another way to be able to look at this conversation about the minerals from the deep sea and what it's used for, it's the batteries, right? That ultimately, whether it's the electric vehicles or even some of the military equipments. So when you start to go deeper into the end users or where they will go, is innovation is already happening. Yeah. There is a lot of innovation that is there, but this information is not being transmitted through the region until the NGOs are starting to be able to pull together some of this information because the industry is deliberately withholding some of this innovation that is happening. And I mean, I think that's probably another conversation, another dialogue that we can have at a later date.
But you have to look at just big companies like Google, Samsung, Volkswagen, etc. These are companies that need to also transition, but they don't want to touch deep sea mining because they know, like you said, the innovation's already happening. And we have to, it's a really good question in terms of trying to push and put effort into changing national policies and regulations around this concept of circular economy, etc. Yeah.
And shifting the way that we value our resources as well.
Yeah.
I've sometimes joke about, setting up, sending the mining industry to landfills and getting them to mine landfills, because they're abundant with metals and who knows what else. Here's a question. Here's an interesting question that needs a classic Greenpeace response from Pauline. If they start seabed mining, how can we protest? How can we stop them? It's way out at sea.
Should we share our campaign strategy at this point in time?
Just be creative.
Be creative.
So many ways.
Yeah. All right. So this is the campaigner in me, and I'm going to invite innovation at this point. So what I'm imagining is company headquarters. There's a presence, banner, protest. There's letters that is going to the company. We show up at different government ministries. We reach out to Greenpeace and other organizations that have maritime capability to go out at sea. We ask some of our foreign partners or any of our partner organizations in different parts of the world where that ship will end up to wait for them while they show up. The resistance needs to be it needs to be across the board. We can't just tackle them from just the sea. I think we need to be able to show up and show them that this is completely unacceptable.
Yeah.
And take them to court.
Yeah, perfect. Yeah. And, with our, with seabed mining here, the action that activists took last week, and of course with the added concern of our fast track approvals bill, we have an open letter which has been signed on, which more than 7,500 people have signed on to that pledge, which basically says to companies who are going to try to use the fast track approvals bill to get their polluting projects over the line, that they can expect more of this resistance. So perhaps the answer is in knowing that there are 7,500 more of you who are of the same mindset, and we can be innovative and creative and think of ways when there's 7,500 brains feeding into this. So,
can I add something also? I think the whole thing is that we always think that when it's happening far away from us, how do we get involved? And I'm going to take the Pacific as an example in this. Yeah. Fossil fuel, like Langi has said, Pacific contributes to global emissions 0.01 or even less than that, right? The whole of the Pacific region. But Pacific governments and Pacific communities are still the strongest in terms of ambition, in terms of pushing for global change in policies. If you look at the UNFCCC or the United Nations framework that governs the climate change part of it, we are the region that contributes the least, yet the most powerful voices. It doesn't have to be happening far away to engage and to be activated in this. Like Langi said, you don't need to climb up buildings in a way, and you don't need to do grand actions. You can talk to your ministers. You can activate your churches. You can talk to the education system. There's so many ways of trying to ensure that the education and awareness around deep sea mining is there, but also that political will and lobbying and advocacy is present so that our governments listen and then wants to change it with the voice of the people. There's so many different ways to... Also, go and follow Greenpeace Aotearoa. They have done some incredible work around deep sea mining, and there's so many beautiful organizations across the world who's fighting this as well.
Yeah, that's a great place to, I guess, invite either of you. Any final thoughts or anything you'd like to say and end our kōrero with?
I'm not sure that I've got any wisdom in me at this point in time, but I want to plea to the heart. This is one of those things that when we go from the head to how we compute the technicalities of this and even the energy transition, the green economy, we'll get lost in the noise of it. And if we tap into the heart in terms of what the damage and the impact this has, that could be irreversible and will stay with generations to come. And I hope that you can lean into, if your heart is speaking to you at this point, before you go back into your head, into the brain, to be able to compute the technicalities of it. And the hand, we've got fingers, there's multiple actions that we can do. And yes, like Shiva was saying, please follow Greenpeace Aotearoa and Greenpeace Australia Pacific and all the partner organizations that are working on this in the Pacific, including the Pacific Blue Line Network, the Pacific Association on Network on Globalization, PANG, and DSCC. There are a lot of organizations that are working on this, that have put some of their best people on this issue. So we have it, but we need you to be able to be with us, to give us that legitimacy, to be able to project your voice and your hope to our decision makers in the Pacific.
Yeah, hard to follow that actually. Hard to follow that, but echoing exactly the same thing, like as in, if you get into the technicalities of it, you will get lost in the noise. But there are people who are sifting through that technicalities. There are people, we are not alone in this fight. Langi just spit out so many names there of organizations that are part, but all of these organizations are backed and supported by communities. We've got incredible people in our Pacific region who's been fighting both the climate crisis fight and now this new frontier that has been kind of pushed forward again. But we need everyone. We need everyone in this journey. If you can do from little things like, there's nothing little about this because it can make massive shifts. If you can write a letter to your minister, please do. If you can engage communities and talk about deep sea mining, please do. If you can go to your university and start talking to your lecturers, etc., to add deep sea mining as part of the curriculums, etc., please do. But just be part of in our Pacific, we use this concept of vaka always. We always say, please jump into our traditional vessel, jump into a canoe, and let's sail together. Let's sail together, and we don't need to go to the Clarion-Clipperton zone where the mining is happening in the Pacific Ocean, but let's sail together where we can all protect our oceans in the Pacific.
Yeah, I think that's a beautiful, beautiful place to finish off our kōrero tonight. I want to thank you both, Shiva, Langi, so much for joining me tonight and having a really good, helpful and inspiring chat with me. And thank you to our audiences for tuning in and joining us. I would implore you to sign our deep sea mining petition. I would ask that beyond following Greenpeace Aotearoa, that you subscribe to our YouTube channel and you'll catch all of our future Greenpeace live shows. Yeah, kia ora, pōmari, thank you.
The blue whale. They are the largest animal to ever exist on Earth, yet they are vulnerable. Right now, blue whales face a new threat. from deep sea mining. Mining companies want to send monster extraction machines to the deep sea floor. The impact will be catastrophic. Mining operations will impact whales' ability to navigate and communicate, risking mother calf separation, starvation, injury, and worse. Donate now to help protect blue whales. Greenpeace is taking action against deep-sea mining and calling for a global ban. Deep-sea mining would cause irreversible damage to ocean ecosystems. Together we can ban deep-sea mining and protect the largest animal ever to have lived. Donate now.